Hello everyone, and welcome to our latest Trends Talk. I am Connor Lokar. I'm an economist and speaker, checking in with you again. Today we're going to be taking on global issues. It's going to be a global flavor to this chat, and we're going to be looking at why trade issues and a slowing global economy matters for the United States. Now, when we look at the U.S. economy, it is the largest economy in the world by a fairly wide margin. And when we look at that U.S. economy, that U.S. gross domestic product, it's nearly $19 trillion now here in 2019, and nearly 2/3 of that is predicated upon domestic consumption. The domestic consumer is king in the United States. Now, goods exports amount to less than 10% of our economy. Goods alone at roughly 8%. Now, all of these are facts, and taken together, one might be lulled into believing that trade issues and slowdowns outside the United States are irrelevant to us. And that would be a mistake. Now, yes, it is true that when we look at goods and services as a percentage of GDP, the United States ranks remarkably low, particularly next to relevant other modernized global economies. We are very reliant on our domestic consumer here, and that's okay. When we contrast that, when we look at again, U.S. goods accounting for roughly 8% of our GDP, and you contrast that to, from the World Bank, we see that Germany, for example, 47.2% of their GDP is based on export activity. When we look at Mexico, it's right near 37.9%. Canada, also north of 30%. As we look at China, right near 20%, and that's actually come down for them in recent years. So when you look at the U.S. within that context, and we see that we are, again, less than 10%, of that overall GDP slide, overall GDP slice of the pie, if you will. Again, it might be tempting to believe that slowdowns outside the U.S. don't really matter to us. Despite that lower percentage, in total dollars, the United States is still the number 2 exporter in the world, behind only China. When we look at total goods exports in the United States at nearly $1.7 trillion, that is a monstrous sum. And when we look at goods and services, that's nearly $2.5 trillion. Again, a gargantuan sum, while not on a percentage basis, but just a pure dollar volume standpoint, still very relevant and very relevant for lots of U.S. companies. Now, are we relying on exports and foreign buyers to the same extent as other countries? No, we're not. But it is not irrelevant, and slowing global industrial production is a problem. When I look at world industrial production, looking at total global industrial activity, is up 2.9% in the most recent 12 months. Now, while that's not a frightening growth rate on its surface, that is the most sluggish since the midpoint of 2017. Now, when I look at the most recent 3 months, the 3 months through January of 2019, that growth rate has slowed to a more anemic 1.6%. Now, that's the slowest since the midpoint of 2016. We are seeing a definite cooling on the part of the global business cycle. And without a doubt, when we look at this projected deceleration, which we anticipate will continue and worsen throughout the rest of this year, the trade disputes are clearly taking a toll and exerting some downside pressure on the global business cycle. Now, the unfortunate reality is that the United States, we have just joined the party. We were late to the party, in fact. We were one of the last modern economies to join this slowing growth trend. When we look at Japan, or we look at China, Canada, Europe, for example, all of them are slowing down, and they have been since 2018. Now, the United States, at roughly a quarter of the global economy, we're just joining the party. Now, when we look at U.S. total exports of goods, they are in what we call phase C. They're slowing in their pace of rise. We see that while they're up 7.4% during the most recent 12 months through January, they are decelerating. And in the most recent quarter alone, exports of goods from the United States are up just 1.9%. Again, the most anemic pace that we've seen since the late stages of 2016. Now, there's another temptation in there where people see that we run an annual trade deficit in the United States. We're importing more than we export. Now, that does not mean that exports don't exist. That just means that overall imports exceed exports. But still, as I touched on, again, nearly $1.7 trillion in goods exported from the United States. Now, when we look at surface trade with Canada and Mexico, for example, at roughly $1 trillion, a lion's share of trade from the United States, that is decelerating as well. In fact, we actually saw that slip slightly negative month over month in December. Now, this matters for North American commerce and U.S. businesses and the U.S. economy. Now, a weak Canada or a weak Mexico, or a slowing Canada and Mexico, or China for that matter, does not necessarily help the United States. Trade is not a zero-sum game. We are partners in that endeavor. Now, there's a tendency for those of you that, obviously those of you that transact directly with our North American partners or globally, or you're sourcing globally, you know that this slowdown overseas and compounded with uncertain trade disputes is costly, highly costly in some cases. But I want to talk to those of you that perhaps don't. Because again, just because you aren't directly selling or sourcing overseas doesn't necessarily mean that this is irrelevant to you. This could be affecting your customers. This could be affecting your customers' customers, which will ultimately trickle through to them and ultimately ripple back to you and your business. So yes, the United States, we are standing tall. We are the largest economy in the world. We are at the crest, if you will. We are just starting to slow down. But that does not mean that the storms that are occurring currently overseas and have been really since the late stages of 2018 are irrelevant to us. In fact, they're more relevant than you think. Thanks for joining us for this latest Trends Talk.